In the Company of Charity podcast coronavirus episode.
So yeah, take one. It's actually like take 3. We just forgot to record.
Oh my gosh.
This is not a funny matter, really.
You guys, this is
serious
something
stuff.
Serious around here. Sister Elizabeth, tell us what's going on up there in Utica, New York.
Yeah, so in Utica, we were talking a little bit earlier, and I was saying that on Friday, the children left school. Well, of course, we've been closing. Things have been closing. Certain municipalities, the governor has declared you can't have any gatherings over 500 people, and you have to be at half the capacity of the facility. So it means a facility of 1,000 can't have more than 500, basically. So you go down from there. So gatherings have to be pretty small. So there are things like that statewide, and we haven't had very many cases, but maybe 3 positive so far. But once they came, there was like the mitigation trying to keep things low. So Friday, the children were sent home with a packet of material for 2 weeks for school. And there was no real warning, because the governor kept saying, no, we're not going to close schools, in New York City. Well, in the state, that's a different situation. So they decided to close the schools for a month.
30 days.
Yeah. So Friday, they went home with these packets that said, here's about 2 weeks worth of work. And here's a Google Classroom link, login information for your child. And so please keep in touch with your teachers, who will be in the buildings off and on through whatever time. That was on Friday. Saturday morning, we woke up to the news that they would be out until April 14th, which is a month. Right. So that's a long time. So it's more than 2 weeks, which means they have enough material for 2 weeks, but they're going to have to go on Google Classroom to get the rest of the material. And I work with refugees. Been here a year, 2 years. First mom came with her packet of things, and she basically said, "Sister, I cannot do this. How can I help my child?" So we're trying to figure out now, with a small community center that we have, where we normally work with the moms. While the kids are in school, we're working with the adults, getting them to doctor appointments and running them all over town and doing English classes, and that we're going to have to rethink everything we're doing and start thinking about how we're going to get these kids in. The local Catholic high school donated 3 Chromebooks to us that they were just giving us to help with the kind of work we've been doing, mostly one-on-one with refugee adults as they need it. So now we're going to be able to use those to get kids who don't have computers at home, get them started on their Google Classroom logins and everything else. So we're like scrambling to find every tablet, every laptop, every computer we have anywhere, and say, well, we can use that one, to get that stuff together. And then, of course, figure out we're going to bring these kids in. Right. And then today we found out that they'll have lunches, breakfast and lunch. They can go to their school and pick up the meal for the day, which means traveling to their school or traveling to a school close to you to pick up the meal for the day and then bring that back home. So I don't know. Put on your gloves and stay 6 feet from any of this is going to work. So we have probably about 10 kids that are like right in our neighborhood that I drive to school in the morning, not all of them, but some of them. And so I think we're just going to focus, try to focus on those kids just to help them get through this. But it's very strange. It's like a ghost town in a lot of ways, and it really hasn't hit here. So we're just worried. But state of New York, close to 800 people already have tested positive. 65 are in ICU beds, and so it's getting scary, definitely.
We had a little event honoring Brother Albert, who's one of the brothers down here, and the CEO of the hospital happened to be there, and he was telling us, that the ICU beds, there's not a lot extra on a good day. And
right.
So if there were to be more issues, that our our one hospital in Brownsville, and there's one in Harlingen, that these places are going to be strapped if things get much worse. And we're a border town, and people go back and forth pretty frequently, so we're not sure if the border is going to get closed at some point or what have you. But it's very interesting. We have programs that work with the elderly and folks who have diabetes, and that all of that has been modified / canceled / we're going to Skype in, Zoom in, do any kind of thing that we can to at least get the information and check in on people to make sure that they're handling their medications and injections and all of that.
The healthcare
properly.
Oh my gosh, the healthcare situation is clearly the toughest when you think about our healthcare system is really set up for the very, very sick, typically, and there are already sick people in the hospital, and so how does it even manage with this capacity to, at the lack of capacity to really make this work? It's just going to be crazy.
Yeah.
But I keep saying, I'm telling you, governors, they are going to save the world,
Right.
I mean, you may not always agree with everything they do, but our governor is like, boom, 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 we're doing this, and this is what we can do, and this is what we need, and this is what everyone should be doing. And you just feel, like little things in the paper or things on TV that, like check
it's
online.
It's a light in all of
it. You just gotta feel like, okay, someone's got this, someone at least has some sense of, and you can tap in each day and say, well, where are we in this? What's going on? And that's
we're
why
all going to have a story to tell.
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of stories to tell because, anyone who's been listening to this podcast knows, I'm not the kid magnet. I'm not, maybe I'm a little bit of a kid magnet. They like me. I'm not always liking them, They're cute. I love these kids. I love these kids, but sitting down and teaching is going to be a challenge,
It'll be interesting, but we have a good episode today. We'll have stories to tell, but we have some cool stories that we're going to hear from 3 special sisters. And one of the things that struck me, and I think that this is true of that, something we're all striving for, is when we work with people, it's to be to have humility in the sense of we're learners, that people, the people we serve are the experts of their own experience. And that definitely comes out in these episodes with the missionaries, that there's a certain attitude to come in with, not that I'm going to solve all the problems and save the world, but to be with people and to learn from their experience and to do what they need for their situation.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I'm listening to this one and the others that'll come up. Sister Pat Byro last week. And this is such a perfect time. Certainly our missionary sisters have had to face some ominous, experiences of illness and disease and the lack of resources. And they know best how to, just as you were saying, listen and learn from the people themselves. And to be there as really, truly servants, totally available to what a group of people need in order to live the best, productive, wonderful lives that they can, and to be able to overcome poverties that are so detrimental to their life, and so it's amazing. And so these missionary chat with the sisters in your house in Brownsville. And I know they'll be introducing themselves. So I imagine that this was a great conversation. I know the interview was great.
Everything we tried to do.
I was just going to say
what we kept. We kept a couple of the stomach churning stories, but not all of them.
Not all of them. Thank you, God.
Well, without further ado, enjoy this episode, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
And everybody stay safe. Wash your hands.
Yes.
Okay, hello everybody. This is Sister Liz, and
I'm here with three lovely ladies who I happen to live with and who happen to have some experience on the foreign missions. And I think it's kind of a unique situation for our province to have a house that has so many, missionaries in it. And, they sent you all way down to a somewhat of a foreign mission in the farthest reaches of southern Texas. And so we'll just let everybody introduce themselves and then just say very briefly about where you were and how you got to where you were when you had that experience.
Well, I'm Sister Phyllis Peters, and I was in Ethiopia for 10 years. And how did I get there? Well, I was missioned there. And I was close to 50 years old, and I thought it was getting about time. If I didn't get there then, I may never get there. So I pushed a little harder, so I finally arrived there.
Mm-hmm. You're up.
Oh, I'm Sister Mary Jean Tague, and I had the privilege of being able to be a missionary in Bolivia and also Angola. And in Bolivia, I was studying pharmacy at the time. I heard that the community was building a hospital in Bolivia, so I figured they might need a pharmacist. So that's when I volunteered. But I had to wait a long time before I got to go there. I'm finishing school and working in a hospital pharmacy, but it all materialized.
And I'm Sister Margaret Palmer, and I'm the least missionary of the missionaries here. But I had the great privilege of working in refugee camps with the Cambodians in Thailand back in 1979-80. It was all of 3 whole months, but it was one of those episodes in your life that it's like a touchstone. You just keep going back to it. So that's my experience.
And so I think it might be helpful to explain briefly that the community of the Daughters of Charity, we are missionary by nature, and so we're all missionaries, and some of us have the privilege to go on the foreign missions, but that's something that number one, you have to request and express some interest in that, and then also that there has to be a need on the international level for whatever skills or what have you that sister has. And so for all of us, we know that it's not a guarantee to be sent on a foreign mission, but that it's a great privilege. And so I guess I wanted to start off by saying how did your experience help your understanding, or did it change your understanding of the community and of church, of service? What might you have to say about that?
Well, for me, it was an opportunity to meet the larger community, because the whole point of us going to the refugee camp with the Cambodians on the Cambodian border of Thailand happened because a French sister who had been many years in Vietnam and then in Thailand saw the need of the thousands of refugees pouring across the border and alerted the Mother House in Paris and said if the sisters found a way to get there, they would be of service, great service. And our sisters came from maybe 8 or 9 different countries, from several provinces of the United States, and we joined with different groups. Our group was with Catholic Relief, but there were others that worked with Red Cross and other groups, and served in the camp however that we were asked to do. And it was an opportunity that we would not have gotten into if it weren't for our international presence in that country.
In Bolivia, as we started, the year I went, which was 1967, it also became an official province, the province of Bolivia. Prior to that, it had belonged to Peru, which was again attached to the mother house. And so in 1967, as the new province of Bolivia, we started out with a great desire of making it a real Bolivian province and hopefully recruiting or attracting many young Bolivians to be part of the community. As we were trying to grow, we also had sisters coming from Holland, from Ecuador, from Spain, and it did enrich our community life and also an understanding of the different cultures of our own sisters in the different countries from which they came. So that was a great experience in Bolivia.
And I think it is interesting, like you have to be open to these experiences of different cultures, and it really pushes you. And so, I think it's a good point that the gift of having an international community is that you really do broaden your horizons in a way.
One of the things that I remember from the Bolivian sisters, we formed the Bolivian sisters and had their initial formation when it was just the Americans and the Bolivians. And as the other cultures came, they had to adapt to the other cultures as well as we did. And I remember one of the Bolivian sisters saying to me, you Americans know that you don't know the language and the culture, and you really do try to adapt to that. But the sisters from Spain think because they know the language, they know the culture, and they don't. And so that was a whole learning experience, too.
What about you, Sister Phyllis?
Well, I guess, it certainly broadened my experience of different cultures, because I was the only American over there at the time. And, but, you asked the question, did it change my idea of community or church? And it changed my idea of church a little bit because they had the Giz right and they didn't have the United States, the right we use. And so I just have to say I got a greater appreciation not only for the different cultures that were there, but for the church also, and different aspects of the church. We worked closely with Vincentians in all that we did. So that was great. I mean, I always realized I was a guest there. And I always respected the values that they had of person, the other person, religion, and their families. Those were the three greatest values they had. And so that was very important to me. And I think in the Hispanic culture that I work now, those are three very important aspects of their culture also.
When I lived in Chicago, I lived with a sister from Eritrea, which is right next to Ethiopia, and we went to a Gay's Right Mass, and they just want to incense everything. They're incensing the altar 3 times, the ambo 3 times.
That's right.
And they have really elaborate cultural dress, and the priests, and
3 or 4 hours.
Really
A long time.
Yeah, you could talk about how long the masses are in some of these areas. I think sometimes people have a very romantic idea about what missionary life is, and I think, when we talk about intense experiences, that perhaps the joys, the highs are higher and the lows are lower. So I don't know, maybe if you can say a word about the real of it. What were some of those stories or experiences that were?
Well, I know from my perspective, I had never been anywhere except Canada, and to drop into rural Thailand and working in a camp of 180,000 people just living in these shacks of tents and coming with such trauma, and it was, we were told by Catholic Relief that we couldn't come on our own, but if we formed a group that would be supportive of each other, then we could go. So 5 of us, none of us had any experience in foreign missions, and it really was intense. You went from being joyful that you were helping somebody. We worked in an intensive feeding ward where starvation was rampant, and it was the same in the whole camp. But then you went to great joy when somebody found a relative, and then the next day, great sorrow because their only relative died or something. Or I remember getting very close to a young woman, and her niece who was a baby, and we thought the baby was doing fine, and then all of a sudden everything went wrong. And the baby died in January 26th, and I always remember because that's my dad's birthday. And I wasn't there when it happened. And when I came back in the next morning at 5 a.m, Mom was sitting there waiting for me because she was afraid I wouldn't know. And we couldn't speak. We had no language in common, but we knew exactly how each of us felt. So there were lows that were still, you can hear it still get me. And there were great highs when one family that I worked with came to South Carolina, and first to Washington, and I was able to meet them and see their new baby and give them some help. So life is full of that, and it was just more concentrated and more intense in that situation.
From my experience in Bolivia, and also I had a 3-year stint in Angola in the 90s, I found that there were highs and lows, and I like to concentrate on the highs. The chief, excuse me, the work that I was sent to do was work in the pharmacy in the new hospital, and I had a whole year to set that up. And then at the same time, we had a school of nursing so that we could have staff for our hospital. And I ended up teaching in the school of nursing when I finished language school. And it was just wonderful to see those young girls want to help their own country. And we were able to take the young girls from any part of the country, the ones who were from families that were a little bit more stable and those who were very, very poor. And it was just wonderful to see the pride of the parents when their young daughter graduated from the School of Nursing. It was quite a struggle, though, to make sure that they, completed their studies. We had a program that started out after they finished high school. The education in the country was not that great, so we had sort of a little starter course for them, and those who managed to get through the starter course were able to come into the School of Nursing. But the School of Nursing, the big high of that was it was known through the whole country as really, if they were a nurse from Elizabeth Seton School of Nursing, they were good nurses, and it was just so nice to be able to see that.
So you were a professor and in a second language.
Oh, yes. I said that when I first had to teach, they had me teaching growth and development, which I never had in my whole life. I had a book. So I said the knowledge went from the notebook of the teacher to the notebook of the student without going through the head of either, as I was teaching class. But anyhow, we managed. And then as I became a little bit more comfortable with the language, I ended up teaching pharmacology to the nursing students. And it just, became easier in general. So that was a high for me, the conquering the language and being comfortable in it. Those are the things. A funny thing that happened is one of our little neighbors in this town was Carabuco up by Lake Titicaca. The little boy fell, and it's evident he had a fracture. And, of course, there are no doctors in town. So I stabilized the leg as well as I could and said the next day we'll drive him into the hospital. I went to the house the next day, and the boy had vanished. The mother hid him from me. Anyhow, she went out. The boy's big sister said, she went out last night looking for a snake, and they're very hard to find up here. And they found the snake, and they wrapped his leg up in the snake powder. And no kidding, I'll tell you the truth, that little boy was walking a lot sooner than he would have if he went to the hospital. So
he never got to the hospital.
He never got to the hospital. They wrapped his leg up with the snake, the ground up snake, and immobilized it. And he was running around town within a few weeks. So you have to adjust to what the people believe in their native medicines. But it's just a whole learning process. You adjust. The people believed in their witch doctors. And I had one lady come to me with stomach problems. And she, I gave her the right. She knew that I had medicine and that I was sort of fairly good at getting people better. But then after she got my medicine, can I go over to the Yatiri too? I said, yeah, you take his medicine, but take mine too. Mm-hmm. So you sort of just go with the flow and try to respect their culture and hopefully try to let them know that, you're trying to help them too. Mm-hmm. It was a great experience.
And we had, like Mary Jean was saying, we had a lot of snakes in Ethiopia and scorpions, and but we used this black stone. It's the bone from the hip of the cow. And we kept that black stone on us all the time. And when people were bit by snakes, they walked miles to come and get the stone. Sometimes they brought it back and sometimes they didn't. But we just, once they used it, we put it in milk and it refurbished itself so it was fresh again, and we just used it. And it helped. I mean, I remember one sister who, I even hate to say this, but she sat on a scorpion and she had 3 or 4 scorpion bites, and we put about 3 black stones, and they actually are just tight against your skin, and they just suck out all of that poison, and they just drop off automatically when they've taken all the poison out. And so we just put them in milk, and she was fine. So I mean, so we use that quite frequently. I still have some here, and I know now it's not the best.
Don't tell the health department.
But I remember when I was in Ethiopia, Sister Seraphine came over, and I think people who know her, she's quite the woman. Anyway, she came, and we were up in Mekelle, and we were on call. And when you're on call almost for a week at a time, and you had to walk about a half a mile to get to the clinic. And when you walk down the hill to get to the clinic, you may run into a camel sleeping or a donkey over on the right-hand side or something. So this was all new to her. But we had a lady for delivery, and this was the first baby that I know I ever delivered, and I think probably for Sister Seraphine too. Anyway, we started, and the lady said to us, "Oh, I always bleed. I always have to go to the hospital because I bleed out." And I thought, oh, this is really a great beginning. And so we started, and of course it took 6 hours before the baby came. But when the baby did come, the lady warned me that, the placenta was very hard to get out. So we tried, and we waited, and I pulled a little bit, and I thought, oh my God. I said, Seraphine, the placenta's not coming out. So she went to the book. She said, let me see what I can read so I know what you have to do. So we just rubbed the stomach a little bit more, and pop it goes, and it came out. But what's interesting about that is the baby, they always give the baby, when it's born, a teaspoonful of butter. Mm-hmm. That's just their culture, and most babies would choke on it, but these babies didn't. It's supposed to grease the whole trachea all the way down. And then after the mother actually delivers the baby, they all get together, all the mothers get together and their relatives, and they have this big bowl. It looks like some kind of a cereal, but the butter on top of it is at least an inch thick. And we did it. I mean, we didn't eat it, but we did provide it for them because that was part of their culture. And the baby was fine, and the mother was fine. Nothing happened. So that was a good situation.
I mentioned good experiences, but I had a couple, never bad experiences for me, but just things that sort of took me off guard. When I was up in Carabuco, the Aymaran Indian people believed that twins were bad luck. They believed that the twins had the same soul, and that they weren't two different people. And they would let one twin die if twins were born. And they would bring twins to me, and they wanted me to baptize them, because I also believed if someone died without baptism, God would put a curse on the town. And I wouldn't baptize them because I really wanted the baby to live. I wanted to try to teach them to live. But if it was evident that the baby was going to die, naturally I baptized them. But at one point, they invited me to a home where someone was about to give birth, and the baby was born, but then they thought it was a retention of the placenta, which it wasn't. It was another baby. Well, the family was distraught because it was twins. But anyhow, the second baby was born, and we were able to convince the family that this is really a gift from God, and that we would help them. And in fact, they in the other situations that they named the twins, they would name John, like John 1 and John 2, because they figured they were the same. But this one they gave two different names to. I think it was Alexander, and I can't remember the name of the other one. And they came every Sunday to our little town for I would give them cans of milk powdered milk, and I know we've encouraged the breastfeeding also, but they needed a little supplement. So we know that the twins that day were at least going to hopefully have a better chance at living than they usually do. And then I didn't mention very much about my time in Angola, and I used to think Bolivia was poor, but Angola had been in war for 30 years, and anybody 30 years old and under had known nothing but war and starvation and bad health, bad hygiene. And we had so many little babies dying of malaria, people dying of malaria. I used to say, if we just put a great big, bowl of pills for malaria out in front of the hospital, we wouldn't have to see anybody. They could just take them and go home, because that was one of the biggest things that we had to take care of, plus the malnutrition. But and then another thing there was no doctor, and seeing a lady die in childbirth was awful difficult, because there was just nothing that we could do. Another thing in that place, we'd get people coming in unconscious into the hospital, and we didn't know if they were unconscious because they had malaria or because they had spinal meningitis, and we had no lab tests to be able to diagnose it. So the big thing that we did is, if they could move their limbs, we knew it was malaria, so we gave the medicine for malaria. If they couldn't move anything, we knew it was a meningitis, so then we gave them medicine for meningitis. So we had to really improvise in our diagnostic skills there. Yeah. It was just hard. We had basic medicines for basic things, but so many people, and just to see babies die almost every day. And as Sister Phyllis was saying, that they gave to the newborns this butter. The grandmothers of the babies used to come in, and they'd try to get the baby. They'd feed them this cornmeal mush, which was part of their staple. And we used to say to the moms, don't let the grandmothers get near the babies, because that is not good for them. So anyhow, we had a lot of challenges like that.
Did you ever just stop and say, how the heck did I end up here? Just crazy situations.
That strikes me, because about 2 or 3 weeks into the experience, I remember coming home. Thomasine Kakalik and I, we were always on the same shift, and I came home and I started to cry, and she said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I can't hear one more bad story. I just can't hear another one." Because it was just too overwhelming, and each person's story was worse than the previous one. And then we just had to sit there and pray, and finally I said, "You're being foolish. You're not the one suffering all this, so buck it up and go back and be strong." And then little bits, people's good side and good memories came out, and some of the older people were trying to teach the children about their dance and their music, and all of a sudden instruments were being made, and the kids, especially at night when things were a little less chaotic, they would have dancing and singing, and they got some makeup, and all of a sudden they had a party, and the kids had all little makeup, and they were learning all the dances, and it was like a breath of life coming back into the camp and giving them some hope, because especially the children had never seen anything except chaos.
I think that's wherever you go, where it's really low income and really destitute poverty, they have a spirit amongst themselves that really, it's a joyful spirit that keeps them alive, that keeps us alive, helping them. And it's something beyond. Yeah. It's something that really calls you forth, because sometimes we take too much for granted here. I mean, I have seen people without anything, without anything. No food, nothing in the refrigerator. No, well, they don't even have refrigerators over there. But, and disease in the family. And yet, there's that spark of value and love that they have amongst themselves, and that really keeps them going, because they have faith beyond what we have, I believe. And that's what kept me going. I mean, they were such an example that I felt it really took me deeper into who I am and what the Lord's doing for us every day of our lives.
Yeah, I think that's very true also, because sometimes you wonder what you're doing there. And I knew that in some ways I was helping people by knowing what medicine to give them to help them get well. The other thing was whether or not they were taking the medicine or going into the little marketplace and selling it because they needed money for food was, it was always a risk. But most of the time you knew that, the people were being helped. And there's the people that appreciated what you were doing. And some of the times, let's say in Bolivia, there was a big anti-American spirit, which you really couldn't blame some of the people for. But they never put it on us. They considered us apart from that, And I remember the sisters who were down in Trinidad saying once there was a big anti-American display and they were go home, or no, Americans get out and they were saying, "Hi, sister, how you doing?" And then they keep on going, but everybody else could go. But they appreciated that, we were sort of like generic. And that was a good thing, too, that they knew we were there to help them.
And they taught you, too. I mean, things that I never knew, perspectives that I've never seen before. They taught me much more than I could have ever given them.
And even the poor, like you'd see a death in the family of a neighbor, they would take those children into their home, and they were poor.
Right.
They would share. It just wasn't like tough luck type of thing. We don't have enough to. They would share. It was just great. I remember once in Christmas time, there was a family that was in front of our house at the hospital in Cochabamba, and we thought that, maybe we could help this family, so we brought over some Christmas gifts to them. Well, that guy came over with a live chicken to give to us. He felt like he had to give us a gift too, and you didn't want that, but that's what they do,
All the time.
So
generosity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, they...
See, the greatest joy, though, I think the sisters all talked about feeding centers, and they have to walk miles to get them to a hospital or a clinic. We had a feeding center, and these little kids came to us, and they were so malnourished. They might have been 7, 8 years old, but they couldn't walk. They couldn't hardly crawl. But we gave them some food, and we had a porch outside of one of our buildings with a little... side rail on it, and we always kind of laid the kids there, and the mothers sat there on the steps and helped them. But all of a sudden, and yet all those kids that were malnourished had gray hair.
Yes.
And then red hair.
Yes,
red hair,
it
I'm
really
sorry.
did.
And
Flaggy.
all of a sudden, after you gave them food for a while, and all of a sudden you saw them pulling themselves up on the side,
It's strange.
and they started taking steps, and they were walking, and their hair changed to their normal color. That was a miracle for me, because I've never seen
the
that.
nutrition,
I've never seen how much nutrition can really mean to a family.
I remember a little boy, he and his sister were all by themselves, and the sister was maybe 12, and she looked about 7, and he was 5, and he looked about 3. And he was one, there's a disease called kwashiorkor, and was total lack of protein. And he was all bloated with fluid, and his face was all bloated, his belly and everything. And I remember his little belly button stuck way up because it was all... And she got him there, and after about 3 or 4 or 5 days of eating and getting protein, all that fluid disappeared. And he was much thinner, but at least you knew he was on the mend. And then he started, and again, like his hair was kind of reddish, and it started growing in, and he started having energy and all that. But he and his sister managed to stay together and get to the camps. But all those little things, somebody would say, "Look at those, they got streaks in there." I said, "No, that's malnutrition." And you could see there'd be a streak of red, and then maybe a little bit of dark, and then a streak of, and it was that alternative times when they were eating or not eating that the hair would turn color, and it was like, but they managed it. All it took was a little bit of good food. And it was more than just the medicines. It was basic foods, and it was all very basic. Big pots of chickens and rice, and they'd take the chicken from foot to head and just chop it all up and throw it in there. But it was that's what they needed, and also just knowing that people cared about them because they'd been through so much.
I think, as we kind of wrap up, I can't help but mention the joy that there is in serving the Lord wherever it is He calls us to be. I mean, I remember saying this to Sister Mary Felice, who season 1, go check it out. There's an interview with Sister Mary Felice, who's in the Congo. And I said, do you realize how jealous we all are of you getting to do what you do and be where you are? And they don't have a choice. You just have to live where you are with what you have. And we do have a tremendous amount of choice here. And it, in a way, makes it more difficult for us to live authentically because we can choose to or we can choose not to. And I think we have to keep being sensitive to the Spirit in a way to help us know, is this a need? Is this a want? And those memories that you all have of the things and the people and the places, it helps the rest of us, I think, to be inspired. And whether people go on the foreign missions or not, I think we have to have a more global vision. I don't know if anybody has any final thoughts to share or encouragement, but I just put that out there because it shouldn't just affect us as humans. We're Christian people, and it's a real call that we have.
It's just wonderful sharing in a larger community. I mean, constantly you keep that in front of you. It's not just us in the United States. It's all of us as daughters, and that global perspective is really vital because, for example, during provincial assembly time when somebody comes back and we want to push for something, but then the visitatrix comes back and says something about, well, they didn't go over real well. Well, we could understand probably why much better than those people who haven't been over to different places. That's just not their culture. It's not something that they would automatically accept. It's easier for us to see it, I think. I don't know, maybe I'm...
Yeah. Well, you did get a more global aspect of, the experience of being out of this country in another country has just been so helpful in so many ways. You get a whole different perspective on living community life and your own personal life.
Well, I thank each one of you for taking the time to have conversation about all this, and I think it's been a really graced experience. And so thank each one of you for your service, for who you are, and for sharing that with our listeners.
You're very welcome.
Thanks.
Glad to do it.
This has been In the Company of Charity podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.